This is the Jewish News Podcast in association with Genesis Philanthropy Group, supporting Jewish communities worldwide. Now, the number of coronavirus cases around the world is approaching approximately 12 million. Roughly half of those have recovered, and regrettably, around 500,000 people are known to have lost their lives. But as the numbers continue to rise around the world, a newly released book by Jewish News' special reporter and public affairs consultant Jody Cohen has been released. There are, shall we suggest, maybe a little bit of room for a bit of optimism? Let's find out more, shall we now, from Jody herself, who joins me on the Jewish News Podcast. Jody, first and foremost, thank you very much indeed for speaking to me today. Can we establish, well, I think we've got to start off with the good news because people need it at the moment. Why have we got room for optimism?
Why have we got room for optimism? That is an excellent question. And as we're seeing numbers go up around the world, I think optimism based on reality is more important than ever. If we look at literally half an hour ago in the news, it was announced the Israeli Institute of Biological Research, they've been working on a potential coronavirus vaccine and treatments based on using antibodies from recovered patients. And they've just announced that they're looking to start human trials after the Jewish holidays around the middle of October. So very good news coming from there. If you just have a look at this, there's so much in the pipeline. My book focuses on 30 innovations that were developed during the 2 months of lockdown. So that was approximately mid-March to middle of May this year. And in just that 2-month period, when everyone was facing lockdown, most people weren't able to get to their workplaces, and all of our lives really dramatically have changed. It's no exaggeration to say that. The sheer number of innovations that have come out of Israel and are being developed in that time is absolutely astounding. Now, that's not to say that all of them will go on to be effective. We don't yet know which ones will be effective, and some may not get the funding that they need to be developed. But looking at such a small country, one of the planet's smallest countries, and how much is being innovated and developed here with a view to hopefully tackling this pandemic, not only in Israel, but also sharing their knowledge worldwide, is definitely cause for optimism, I believe.
And what in particular about this? I think we've got a contributor from your dog in the background there. Hello, doggy.
Right. Apologies.
Right, but to anyone who can hear. So I would give name check. What's Pooch's name?
We have two, actually. Charlie, who's a toy poodle, and Maggie, who's a Bichon Havanese.
Excellent. Well, hello, Charlie and Maggie. Welcome to the Jewish News Podcast. In all seriousness, back to your lovely book and your very important book. What is it about it that you decided to write? I suppose what I'm guessing at is what qualifies you to write this book, just Absolutely. So people know.
Right. So I've been working for over 20 years in public affairs, and for the past decade, I've been working on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is really helping companies communicate how they're contributing to the biggest challenges facing the world today. So that's issues like the environment and energy and good health and well-being. And a part of my work as part of this is writing for global pharmaceutical companies and healthcare medical device companies, and taking really sometimes complex scientific processes and innovations and explaining them in ways that people can understand who are not scientists and who are not doctors. But one very important point about this book is it's not a book for people looking for medical advice. So if somebody unfortunately is suffering from the coronavirus, or their friends and family have the coronavirus and they're trying to find tips and cures, and this is absolutely not what this book is about. For that, they should go and see their healthcare professionals. This book is a history, if you like. In the future, this will be a history of a snapshot in time of innovations, what the scientists and the doctors and the startup and NGO CEOs were busy doing during this 2-month period of lockdown to help tackle the coronavirus. And what I mean by that is that for my conversations with all the people involved in these innovations is they started off by obviously seeing what was going on and looking to what was happening in China, and in many cases realizing that this could happen in Israel, and even if it doesn't, it was spreading around the world. And they really had to look at what they possessed, so whether it was their scientific research, their medical background, their networks, particularly for NGOs, their technology, even if it wasn't necessarily related to the field of healthcare. And they looked at what they had and thought, how can we pivot this to help to potentially to tackle the coronavirus? And that's something that Israel is very good at doing. We're an agile country. We're used to dealing with crises. As John Medved from Our Crowd says, he likes to talk about how we turn curses into blessings. So for example, with water, Israel doesn't have enough water. We have the Kinneret, that's the main water source. And yet we have taken this challenge, and innovators have, looked at drip irrigation. We've become one of the biggest global water recyclers in the world, and now we're even exporting water to other countries. So we really take our challenges and look at what we have and see what we can do to address it. And hopefully I'm hoping this is what will happen with the coronavirus. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where the vaccines come from, where the treatments come from. Unfortunately, this is such a huge global crisis that we're going to need many vaccines and many treatments in order to be able to help people all around the world. And some will work with certain populations and others will work with others. So it's all hands on deck. And if a tiny country like Israel could innovate so much, I think that is huge cause for optimism if you multiply that by everyone's efforts around the world. And also if you have a look at the partnership working that's going on with other countries, like we just heard about this delegation that's come back from India, from Israel, and lots of partnership working going on between Israel and India. So there is cause for optimism, both in terms of the pipeline, what's coming down the road, hopefully, and in terms of the partnership working that this terrible pandemic is causing.
Well, the book is called Tikkun Olam, or Repair the World, to those who don't know, Israel versus COVID-19. And we've been hearing about it from its author, Jody Cohen, public affairs consultant and special reporter for the Jewish News. Kol hakavod to you and to all of Israel. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us on the Jewish News podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.